Hello everyone! Do you want to know if a servant is good enough to spend your hard-earned Saint Quartz on? Great, you're in the right place. Welcome once more to the FGO Gacha Guide. Today's topic servant is the General of the White Cavalry, Qin Liangyu. We will be covering all of the points that you see on screen here, so before anything, let's jump into whether I think this servant is worth rolling for or not. In my personal opinion, Qin Liangyu is quite weak. She is easily one of the weakest 4-star units in the game, really close to the very bottom of the 4-star tier list, if not there. Her self-buffs are overall weak. She's based around crits, but is easily outclassed by others that are within that niche, and her NP is just plain bad. Abby, you're in the way of the words. There we go. Perfect. Point at her abs. So, let's jump into the stats and learn why my opinion is as such. Qin Liangyu is a 4-star Lancer-class servant, meaning that she is strong against archers and weak against sabers. She has 8,295 attack at level 80. This is one of the lowest attack stats across all 4-star servants in the game, whilst her HP at 80 is 13,387. This is very high, one of the highest across 4-star servants. Her hidden stats show that her NP charge on attack is 0.79%, very nicely above average, quite good actually. As for her cards, her quick cards do 4 hits, her arts cards have 2 hits, and her buster cards have 3 hits, with her extra doing 4. This is overall below average hit counts for a modern servant, so a little below what we'd want. Her star weight, aka how much priority she has for getting critical stars for her cards over other servants' cards, is 91. This is pretty middling. It's around the middle of the pack, which is unfortunate for her since she is based around making sure her cards can crit. Her star creation rate is 12.1%, a tiny bit above average, pretty around the middle, just on the top part of the middle, but again, not as good as we want because she needs to crit. Overall, her stats come out a little bit lower than average when all things are considered put together. As for her deck and MP, her deck, looking at it a little bit more aggressively, she has 2 quick cards, 2 arts cards, and 1 buster card. This is a non-standard 2-1-2 deck, favoring quick over the buster. Her noble phantasm, poetry of univericious loyalty, Chongzhen Dishi Shige, the Chongzhen Emperor's 4 poems. Other than being a mouthful, is a self-targeted arts noble phantasm to buff herself. It is an MP that will deal no damage on its own. Instead, it will give her some buffs, including a 10% defense down on each hit for only 3 hits. It'll last for 3 turns on enemies, and the buff on her will last for 5 turns. This is worded very weirdly, so I'm trying to explain it properly. She also gets a buff that will make it so her critical hits will remove enemy buffs 3 times, which lasts for 5 turns. There is also a buff put on to all allies that reduces enemy critical damage by 10% for 3 turns. Or, I'm sorry, that's only for herself. By 10% for 3 turns. It lasts for 3 hits for 5 turns. Boy, this is so weird to explain. And finally, she increases her own attack for 3 turns between 30 to 50% based on her MP level, and her overcharge effect makes it so that anytime a party member is crit, it will recover the party's HP when taking a critical hit by an enemy 3 times, lasting for 5 turns, and healing between 2,000 to 4,000 based on overcharge. While that may sound like it does a lot, in reality, it's just a lot of words that equate to saying not doing too much for you. Not only are the good parts of her MP tied to only working for 3 hits, she either has to critically hit others or be critically hit to activate the majority of her buffs. Not to mention, when it comes to the removing of enemy buffs, in difficult fights, which is where you would want a servant such as Qin Liangyu in her skill set and what she's trying to be designed around, break bar buffs are generally unremovable, so buff removal such as this has no effect whatsoever, and it has overall become a relatively weak skill to have. This NP, all things considered, is pretty darn weak. And even the healing that you get when taking a critical hit, even at 10% lower damage, is still, for most enemies, going to be around 8 to 10,000 damage, unless it's a very normal enemy you don't even care if you get crit by. So the heal is basically worthless. Alright, moving on. Let's take a look at her passives. All one of them. She has Magic Resistance C, which gives her 15% more debuff resistance. Basically, she might as well have no passives at all. This does very, very little for her. As for her skills, first off, we have the White Shaft Spear. This increases her quick and arts performance between 10 to 20% based on level, and increases her critical damage between 20 to 30% based on level, and all these buffs last for 3 turns, on a 5-turn cooldown, so pretty high uptime, only 2 turns of downtime, really. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the split color buff skills. It's oftentimes better to just buff one card color, but considering she's based around her cards hitting, this is actually pretty good for her because it's 4 out of 5 of her sources of damage getting buffed. Overall, a pretty good skill for her in general. Next, we have Aspect of the Faithful Soldier. This increases her critical star absorption for 1 turn by 300 to 600% based on level, gives her self debuff immunity for 3 times, 3 turns, and increases her buff removal resistance 3 times for 3 turns, between 50 to 100% based on level. This is a very utility-based skill with some decent temporary buffs, but the fact that she is supposed to be set up as your main damage-dealing unit when you take her into battle, and her critical star absorption only lasts for 1 turn, means that it's focused on the heavy utility and less about the damage amplification, which is what you really want for a servant that is designed like her MP is. So overall, while this skill could find use, it amplifies the parts that are weaker for her. And finally, we have her third skill, Banditry Abolisher. This gives her Guts, which will activate 2 times, lasting for 3 turns, revives with 1 HP, and finally charges her MP gauge by 10 to 20%. And here's the really bad part about this skill, it has an 8-turn cooldown at max level. Ouch! The multiple Guts activations are nice to have, it's what helps Heracles be such a powerful beast, but they only really matter that much when you have your servant soloing. And Qin Liangyu is not a very particularly good solo servant. It's attached to a weaker character than Heracles overall. The MP charge is a nice little bonus to the multiple Guts activation, but it's, again, a very little bonus. 10 to 20% is quite small. And finally, it's on such an incredibly long cooldown with such a short uptime that this is one of the longest cooldown skills in the entire game in terms of activation versus the next time you're going to be able to use it. Pretty overall not great when you put all of her stuff together. Now, what materials do we need to level these skills if you do wish to do so? Qin Liangyu honestly isn't too bad on material costs. She's not too bad at all. To make a skill up to level 10, it takes, in addition to the normal stuff, 11 Snake Jewels, 15 Yggdrasil Seeds, 20 Aurora Steels, and finally 20 Ancient Bells of Tranquility, which is a brand new material released in this Lost Belt. The Auroras and Bells are pretty new materials, one being this Lost Belt and one being the previous one. So to max her skills, it's going to take 33 Snake Jewels, 45 Seeds, 60 Auroras, and 60 Bells. The real bottleneck is the Bells and the Auroras, so it's kind of tough to completely max her as of her release. But it's still pretty easy to get her at least to rank 8. So how does Qin Liangyu stack up to her competition? Well, as a 4-star Lancer with a self-buffing NP, her immediate competition is 3-star Hozuing Inshun. When compared with Inshun, I think Qin Liangyu overall falls short, even with her rarity advantage. Inshun just plain does better damage with his setup. His NP itself buffs him for more damage a little bit better than what hers does. He lacks the utility of Qin Liangyu, but makes up for it by hitting harder. When comparing her to other 4-star Lancers, she obviously just falls short. Her buffs just aren't strong enough to try and keep pace with NPs that are dealing damage to enemies. Now, as I always say, roll with your heart, so if you do want to roll for Qin Liangyu, what skills should you prioritize? I would personally go with her first skill first. It is a much-needed damage buff on her. It focuses on 4 out of 5 of her cards and the critical damage, which is all the main aspects of her. Her second skill would be what I go for next, because you want that uptime as often as possible for her critical star absorption, again for damage increase. And finally, her third skill last. It does not scale very well. The only thing that scales are the cooldown and the NP gain, and it's got an incredibly long cooldown no matter what you do, an incredibly low NP no matter what level, NP gain no matter what level it is. So overall, you can leave that one as a pretty low level for a while. As for craft essences to equip this servant with, seeing as she's a Lancer focused on being a main damage dealer, focused on crits, we want to be able to increase her damage, her crit star gaining, or her NP generation, as that equates to a damage increase on her. Trick or Treatment is a very good CE for most of this. It gives a 25, 30% at max limit break NP generation up, and 15, 20% max limit break critical damage increase. Midsummer Moment is also a fine CE choice, as it gives quick performance up by 10 or 15% at max limit break, and critical damage increase by 10, 15% max limit break, along with producing 3 or 4 at max limit break critical star regeneration per turn. And finally, at Trifus, this is a fine free-to-play alternative, as this is a event CE most people should have maxed if they've played the event. It gives you 10 or 15% max limit broken NP generation up, 10 or 15% increased critical damage, and 3 or 4 star regeneration per turn. These are overall the things that I think should be focused on to help make Qin Liangyu shine. As for servants to pair her up with, Waver fits the bill, as he does with most servants. With his NP charge, attack up, and especially critical damage up, he is a fine source of damage enhancement for Qin Liangyu. Scotty is also a rather fine support for her, as she has a very powerful quick card buff, along with massive crit damage up on her quick cards, which is 2 out of 5 of her cards. Since you want to use Qin Liangyu's quick cards often to make stars so that she can crit, Scotty fulfills an extra purpose on helping generate stars through the quick cards. Swimsuit BB is also a very strong support for her, as you can lock your cards in for 3 turns to guarantee at least 3 turns in which you can continue making use of the cards that you want. And finally, of course, we have Merlin. His NP produces critical star regeneration once you've got it off, along with NP generation, and his Buster card enhancement, which gives you a massive critical turn for 1 turn, is very helpful for Qin Liangyu, as she is based around crits in the first place. So too long didn't watch here. Qin Liangyu is honestly not a very good role. She's quite weak and could really use some buffs. She's entirely focused on crits without the stacks/deck to really back up the star creation and gathering that she needs for it. Her buffs are overall underwhelming and self-centered, meaning she can't even be used as a semi-support. She has no flexibility. She's reliant on high MP levels to try and make up for her low damage, so you need to pull for her very hard just to get her to catch up to other servants. If you do need a very good reason to roll for her, then of course, I mean, it's obvious, look at her. She's a very sweet and charming person. She's a very kind character. Oh, also, skin-tight bodysuit if you're into that kind of thing. So, let me know your opinions on Qin Liangyu, and if you enjoyed this video, check out my Twitch channel, all that stuff. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and I will see you next time on the next Gacha Guide.